So we touched on this a little bit, Jay, but in the book you discuss the impact of purity culture on our adult lives, and that's a lot of kind of a shame-based repression, as we've talked about. So how does that shame-based training that many of us received actually fuel the cycle of addiction and that emotional disconnection in marriage?
I have a couple immediate thoughts that come to mind. So, I don't know if I have shared with your audience about some of my purity culture days from high school. So,
Even if you have, it's been long
I'll go
enough. It
back
would
to
be
it.
remarkable
And
if people remembered. So just
feel
go
free
for it.
to edit some of this out if it's too potentially graphic. Just so I went through puberty while attending a Southern Baptist high school in Virginia. So there was a large Christian university in the state of Virginia that we would have like a lot of chapel speakers come and address. And so they would often divide, the boys and the girls. And I'll never forget it. I was a junior or a senior in high school, and the chapel speaker that they brought in for the guys basically brought us into this story of like the Inuit people when they were trying to keep wolves at bay. They would basically take this like dagger, this knife, and dip it into seal's blood, and then they would put the dagger, the knife outside of the camp. And so what would happen is that the wolf would smell this seal soaked knife and begin to just smell the blood and would start licking the blood over and over and over again. But what it couldn't discern was the difference between seal's blood and then eventually its own blood. And then in the morning, there would be like a dead wolf. And this speaker, who was probably, didn't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, 24, 25 years old, just said, there's a lot of you boys that are masturbating. There's a lot of you that have lust filled thoughts. And I'm telling you, it feels good right now, but in the morning, you're going to be spiritually dead. And he just paused, dramatic fashion. I remember turning my head, like looking back to all the underclassmen. I'm like, you just traumatized like an entire student body of boys with this message. Like, no instruction of what arousal is, no instruction of, no discipleship of how to understand these things, no theology built around this, just the sense of like fear. And that's really what purity culture began to
Mm.
teach people, is to fear not just sexual immorality or premarital sex, which have been part of the Christian tradition. Part of what it began to associate for people was, when I feel aroused, I'm sinning. And it was even worse for women. The message that they got in their classrooms were, basically this kind of example of a flower being passed around, that, just imagine this beautiful flower petal, and then if you go to second or third base with your boyfriend, essentially take off a petal. If you have premarital sex, then take off like four or five petals. And then by the time you end up in marriage, you're going to, hand your husband this kind of broken
STEM.
flower with no stem, with no
Yeah.
petals. And so it was even worse for women, where they were told, all men are just incredibly sexual, you have to be the gatekeepers. And then if you felt your own arousal, and more importantly, if you felt the arousal of someone else, you needed to guard not only your own heart and body from this, you also needed to protect men from themselves, and adult men, as a teenager. And so it just became this kind of petri dish of trying to understand, like, how do I make sense of all of this? So I remember many, many years later, I was listening to a sex therapist, and they said that essentially between the ages of 13 and 15, the male body will go from like, it's basically a 20x increase in testosterone.
Wow.
So go from like a shot glass to a pint glass, or like a balanced strider bike to a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And part of the dilemma is like no one, at least in my high school and often in purity culture, was never given any instruction about how to understand their bodies. So at my 20-year reunion, we were talking about unspoken prayer requests that would go up on the board quite a
Right.
bit. And part of what we were joking about was 90% of all the unspoken prayer requests from boys between the ages of 13 and 15 was like sexual thoughts or masturbation. And again, no one gave us any discipleship, any understanding of how to understand the bodies and the arousal that God has given to us. So, long way of saying, when you begin to associate arousal with something dark and evil and something that needs to be prayed against, or you begin to kind of just feel like, okay, I've just killed my spiritual life because I masturbated last night, rather than understanding that, you know, our heartache, our brokenness, our sin is not just a barrier to our understanding of the gospel. It can also become something of a bridge. When those messages aren't received, then we begin to kind of go deeper into shame and therefore into hiding, which then sets up the whole cycle all over again. That the more
Mm-hmm.
I feel sexual, the more dark my behavior, the more I need to hide, the more sinful, the more I need to attack this form of spiritual death. And then it just sets up a lot of hiding from there.
Hmm. Yeah. It's surprising. I'm glad that you talked about the way that it impacted women, because there's a lot of women that we talk to that not only do they feel so much shame when they have sexual desires just because they've been told that sex is really just for men and you just have to be a willing participant, but also um, the idea that that anything sexual that I would feel during high school or before marriage is wrong. And so I need to just shove that down. But then magically, I get married and everything is
Right.
okay, even though I have no understanding of what any
Yeah.
of it is or how it works or anything. But all of a sudden, it's like, no, 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 no. And then, yes, have at it, have fun, enjoy each other. And they're like, what? What?
What? I know. Oh my gosh, Heather, as you said that, I'm like, I got whiplash. Just that sense of like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And then you're supposed to be a rock star and amazing at this thing. And it's like, what?
Yeah. Well, and
Yes.
I think in the
It's
church,
whiplash.
we even make a woman feel abnormal if she has sexual desire. It's
Mhm.
kind of like, well, women aren't supposed to be, that's our stereotype of a Christian woman. Like, well, actually, that might just be a very normal human emotion and feeling. And then someone's feeling they're abnormal because of it. But I heard both of those illustrations growing up, Jay, in my youth group days and camp days. And, I was thinking about this just the other day, the idea of like, where does temptation come from? Where does the strong desire to have something that's not mine, even that God has said is forbidden or off limits? And as I was thinking about Genesis 3, it's very interesting to me that Adam and Eve in that story had a strong desire for something that God had told them not to do or not to have. They longed for it. And this was pre-sin. This was pre any fallenness in the creation narrative. And so it says to me, somewhere tucked into God's creation is our capacity for lust and temptation. Now, I'm not trying to say God made us to be tempted, but he gave us these longings that were so strong, we would be tempted even to reach out for things that would hurt us. And that's part of creation somehow. And I'm still thinking through what that means. But if nothing else, I think it means the capacity for really strong desire that even might go beyond the bounds of what's good for us actually is part of what God designed. And if he designed that, then it says something about how important desire is for all of us.
Oh, so good. Yes. And knowing that, I mean, that's part of at least what we experience within a particular family is that we want our kids to have really strong desires. We want them to bring their anger. We want them to bring their anxiety. We want them to bring their entitlement. We want our kids at some level to see things and for the family to be the place where we help walk them through what growth, what healing, what integration, what obedience all looks like. And so I think, yeah, we've got to begin to kind of work with this notion that we have these strong and raw desires that are inevitably going to trespass, that are inevitably going to rebel. But I think there was this guy by the name of Winnicott. He was a British object relations theorist, and he said good parenting is a little bit like what we see Jesus doing on the cross, which is like way too high of a standard. But he said part of what needed to happen there is that humanity needed to give their worst. They needed to transgress, to scapegoat, to sin, to bring all of their anger, all of their murder, all their adultery, and see that Jesus was vulnerable enough to be impacted by it, but also strong enough to survive even the worst thing that we could throw at them. And when we see that, that's how we can begin to develop a much more secure relationship. And I think that's where, families and churches, we don't want to see people fail, but it's like failure is part of being human. And so how can we create communities that don't endorse, don't sanction, don't encourage failure, but to be able to say from the earliest age, we're going to fail in the realm of finances. We're going to be greedy. We're going to try and store all this stuff up for us and not think about our neighbor. We're going to be so concerned with our own desires for ourselves that we're going to forget about the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. We're going to be so focused on how sex meets our needs that we forget to find that all forms of sex and touch are pleasurable to our partner as well. So I think there's just, embedded in all of human development is failure, but especially in this particular realm, we don't like to see it. And therefore, I think we put it into hiding.